Welcome to Unplugged, an IIoT podcast, where we delve into the fascinating world of industrial Internet of Things and automation. I'm your host, Phil Seboa.
Hello, Phil, and I'm Ed Fuentes. And today we have the very special guest with us today. It's Dave Griffith. He's the co-host of the Manufacturing Hub podcast, which I think both Phil and I are quite avid listeners to. And they're about to launch, as we found out today, their 171st episode. Yeah, so I say that and I still think about that number, Dave. It's incredible. But Dave, not just through that, obviously, Dave, but has quite an extensive background in manufacturing automation and IIoT, and we're very excited to have him here today and have a chat with him.
Yeah, Dave, welcome to the show. We're thrilled to have you here.
Absolutely. Phil, Ed, thank you guys for having me here. I'm super honored to be one of the early episodes of this new show.
Yeah, awesome. Let's start with the podcast. The Manufacturing Hub now is in its, 170th episode, which is a fantastic milestone. Can you tell us a bit about the journey and what inspired you to start the podcast?
Absolutely. No. So I was joking with these guys that episode 170, 171, and sometimes I am even surprised that we've gotten this far. And I think it's very much because people are happy to continue to have conversations with my co-host Vlad and I, and people are happy to come share, and mostly because we've got listeners who are happy to listen. So for everyone that doesn't know, Manufacturing Hub is a podcast that we like to talk about. Vlad and myself, we are practitioners in the space. The vast majority of work that we've done is technical work in the space on both of our sides. And so we like to go talk to other people from the practitioner's point of view. I like to joke. So early on, Manufacturing Hub started during the pandemic, and we got to have all of these awesome happy hours, and you got to go have conversations that were like half an hour or an hour long, or it almost didn't matter how long because everyone had almost unlimited space in their schedule to go meet and talk to new people. So we had a couple of happy hours, and it was one of those. This would be really cool to be able to go capture some of these conversations, because you get to go have conversations like you're at a conference and you're sitting at the bar, or my favorite, you're sitting at breakfast and you get to sit down next to new people who you haven't met before, and you get to like go wild into different tangents and ask them how they got there, and really go ask the questions that you want to know because you're in a very captive area. And we were having these conversations. And so my thought was, it's almost a bad thing that we're not capturing these, right? Like I feel going and having these conversations, being able to capture the answers to these conversations and being able to go share these is useful for people in industry today. And it's also going to be useful for folks who are looking to get into industry in the future. And so as Vlad likes to joke, I posted a post on LinkedIn saying, hey, if I were to go stream some interesting content and conversations, would people listen? And I think my initial concept was on Twitch, and Vlad was the only person who knew what Twitch was. And we had a couple of conversations, and the rest, they say, is history. At some point we realized that we spent maybe too much time preparing we didn't need every single point, and we just go have some of these fun conversations. And over the first probably 20 to 30 episodes, we morphed into kind of different conversations that we're going to have with different groups, and kind of the types of questions and really digging into people's backgrounds that brings us here today.
There's a lot there, Dave. I imagine from when you started with Vlad creating these, and the discussion initially and meeting people, like you said, you would have spoken to countless of industry leaders, different innovators, different people through that journey. And I, like Phil and I at the moment, we do this for a couple of reasons. One, we do like a chat, but two, we're constantly learning, and we'll ask questions about your learning in a minute. But in all that, have there been any sort of key insights you found, or maybe some highlights they take you back thinking that was a key knowledge learned or a key thing? Because I find every time we have an episode with Phil, I walk away thinking, there's something else. I just added another nugget to my knowledge. Are there any key nuggets you think you could share with us that you've found or discovered over that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to joke, Ed, that when Vlad and I started, we started and we were asking super selfish questions, right? We were asking questions of things that we wanted to know the answer to. And
Yeah.
we're just super happy that other people also wanted to know the answers to those questions. So Manufacturing Hub is very much kind of split into what we call themes. And so every month we pick a different theme, and then we have 4 conversations surrounding those. And the goal is, or the hope is, 1, we all get to learn something, and 2, we get to have good conversations. But very much so, if you're a new listener looking to come in, if you're a new listener looking to come in and you don't know anything about the topic, then it very much is, hopefully you can listen to these 4 episodes and have a general idea. So I would say when I look back, and there are so many things to go look back on, right? And I feel like if I go start talking about particular people, I'm going to go get myself in trouble, because 20 minutes from now, when I get off the show, I'm going to think about the 50 or 100 other really good conversations that we had. But I think at the end of the day, when we talk to groups across a number of different industries, we see so many of the same problems over and over again. And it's less, from my perspective and the things that I've learned, kind of the different pieces of technology and how we use them, and more so kind of everyone has the same overarching goal and the same overarching needs, right? We need to go collect and capture data, and how we define data is a completely different conversation, but we need to go collect and capture data. And then from that point, it's got to get pushed somewhere, be it a process historian or an MQTT broker or an ignition SCADA that lives somewhere else. So we have to go push that somewhere. And then hopefully we're able to go collect that information. And we've had a couple of guests talk about kind of the plumbing, right? And we recently had, we've recently done an IIoT theme. We had a couple of guests refer to IIoT as plumbing. And I think that that's a really good way that resonates with me on how we go use and connect things, right? It's less important how it's connected, and it's more important that it is connected. And we've plumbed from point A to point B. We've captured the data as to if it's a paid for IIoT service, as to if we've purchased it, as to if we've hardwired everything from sensor through PLC up the normal Purdue model. I find that it's really important to think about it in that area. And yeah, I find it important to think about it in that area. And then another key point, another key topic that we talk about a lot on the show, and we talk a lot about kind of in the pre and post show conversations that we get to have, is that so many of these groups have the same problems, right? We all have the problems, and almost every group in almost every industry thinks they're behind, right? I have talked to very few groups who are like, we are the world-class leaders in X. And I'm having in early mid 2024 lots of conversations about artificial intelligence. And so most of those conversations are, hey, we feel like we're way behind on the artificial intelligence side. And I feel like a lot of that artificial intelligence may be replacing the IIoT, the Industry 4.0, the digital transformation buzzwords, because this is just the position we're in, is this is what everyone is talking about. And so when I go talk to people, when I go talk to clients, I find it really important to go cut through a lot of that noise and understand what these terms really mean for people. And that has been very much said kind of time and time again, is it's important to go understand what insert X word means to the particular group that you're talking with. Because again, most of these groups have very similar problems. Sometimes we just use different words to go talk about those problems.
Yeah, I think there's a few points there. I guess one, I really enjoyed my episode on your podcast, so feel free to go check that one out, because that was a lot of fun talking about how ignition is taken over. So that was a lot of fun. And then I guess I think you make a really great point there, is that lots of people are not on the bleeding edge. Right, they're not on the next generation of technology. They're on the catch up, and there may be a few I guess, technology leaps behind, or they might be just looking into those next technology leaps. It's a very kind of nuanced position, right? We're talking about Industry 4, and I'm talking with a lot of customers around Industry 3 best practices, right? Like, how do we get our PLCs connected to our infrastructure? How do we get the data out of these systems? Like those types of challenges really do exist across the board, and most of the clients are not alone in their challenges as well. So having that platform to be able to talk about these challenges is really vital, and we really appreciate that. And one of the inspirations for starting this podcast as well. I guess. To give us, I guess, a bit of a step back on your journey into industrial automation, and I guess how did you get into the industry?
Absolutely. So I've spent the last 15 plus years all across manufacturing and industrial automation. And Phil, one of the things that I like to joke about is so my dad is also in the industry, and I've had grandfathers on both sides who were in mostly on the manufacturing side. And so as I like to joke with everyone, I did what any young boy does whose dad is in this industry, is I tried everything else. Right. And so my technical background is in aviation and aerospace. And so in the US and North America, I'm certified to go work on a bunch of airplanes. And I thought that was going to be kind of the opportunity to go do all of these things. Little did I realize that it's a really good technical background to go work all across manufacturing and industry. I took that background and I went to go work for an OEM that builds the large gantry machines that drill and rivet airplane fuselages together. And it kind of went from, this is my technical background, to, hey, let's go design an entire aircraft facility to go build the back few pieces of the fuselage. And kind of from that point, it's like, hey, going and figuring out how we put all of these things together, while absolutely not the best way to do it, right? We did it with engineering graph paper. We did it with engineering graph paper on a conference room table. And so longtime listeners of Manufacturing Hub will know that I've shared this story before, and I have pleaded with everyone to please go use a digital twin or a simulation or any other tool, because I can still close my eyes, 15 years later at this point, and still see moving all of the engineering grid and graph papers around, because that is just how many times I went over and over again. And from that point, I realized that I really enjoy solving problems, and I enjoy taking things apart and trying to figure out technical problems. And that just kind of led me further and further into various parts of process automation and systems integration and consulting and operational excellence and all the different pieces that I get to touch today.
Yeah. I have that memory too, Dave. Not that I was involved in aircraft design or anything, but yeah, that idea of sitting in a conference room, different people talking and discussing and trying to fix problems, just the way we are as humans. Just listening before to your story around how you've gone to different places. I mean, different people, different themes, and over 171 episodes you've done. Not just that, I imagine there's so much more information that, and unfortunately, was never recorded. There's chats you have at other companies. Interesting how you also said something was very interesting, and Phil and I talk about this quite a bit, about where industry is at. You mentioned that everyone, they all agree they're not at the front end or bleeding edge of where they should be, and they're looking forward, like now, to AI, things that are still way out of their grasp to what technology they sort of need to implement now. And through your podcast and the people you've met, everyone seems to be willing to share. And I think there's this willingness to be open and just share information, like our protocols that we support, right? Just the ability to share and open up information and data. And that openness, and we've seen it, and I've seen it more and more now, how people are happy to share that information or that knowledge, but also with the idea of exchanging knowledge. Is that how you see it too? This ability, I'll open up things and maybe that'll help you, but also what can you share back with me? I noticed that happening quite a bit, which is great. And these sort of platforms, I see that change is being shared as well. How do you find that? Are you seeing that sort of ability to find more information, open to talk? Is that helping? Is that driving our industry?
Absolutely. I think it's very important. As to if it's driving the industry, I'm not quite sure that we've reached critical mass of knowledge sharing yet, but I think it's really important. So when I talk as to when I was a young applications engineer, when I've worked with different groups in different industries, especially kind of early in my career, how there were very much kind of two groups of people. One are people who are super happy to share and super excited to go share their knowledge. And if you ask the question or you spend time with them, they'll happily pass it on. But there are lots of people in this industry who, like, they held that process knowledge, they held that engineering knowledge really close to the vest, and it's almost like pulling teeth to go through the process of understanding, what they knew. And it's looking back, it's so sad that there are so many of these people, one, not creating that documentation, not creating that knowledge base internal to companies, but two, people thinking that, hey, I need to go hoard this knowledge. The only way for me to be successful and continue to have a long career is to hoard this knowledge and be the only person that I know. I feel like it's gotten a lot better in the last 10 years and certainly in the last 5 years. And from my perspective, if I have knowledge on something, I'm generally happy to go ahead and share. I think it's important to go share that knowledge because, as we're seeing in the US and North America, and as I assume you guys are seeing in Australia, there are lots of people who are at the precipice of retiring. And because they're on the edge of retiring, it's to the point of we're going to lose all of that knowledge. And that is perhaps the scariest thing possible. If we're going to have, hundreds or thousands of years of knowledge walk out these doors, they're going to retire, and we're basically never going to see it again. So I think it's really, really important to go ahead and share. And that certainly to some extent is why we do the show, why we go publish it in long form, and why whenever I go talk to people, it's super important to go through the process of, hey, we need to go share everything that we've learned, and we need to go build it in tools. We need to go build it in a place. And then not just do we need to go do that, but we need to go share and train people, new employees at the level that they're coming in at, right? I don't know about you guys, but I have been sat down in literally windowless rooms and said, the next phase of training is here's this 2,000 page manual with size 8 font, and maybe we've got some slightly larger headings. And I really struggle to go learn from that, right? Like maybe we get 2 pages, maybe we get 10 pages, somewhere around page 1,000. Like my brain just goes, my brain has already been at Jello 3 days before. I'm more of a hands-on learner. That's how I learn things. And we see a lot of people in newer, younger generations who are really good and they want videos, right? And so we see lots of YouTube videos, which I think are awesome. We see more people look at those shorter, like TikTok style videos. I don't know how easy it is to go share like in-depth technical knowledge on those 20-second, 30-second clips. But I do know that is the attention span we have of lots of people. So I think education and sharing that knowledge is more important today than it has been in any time in our history. And it will only become more and more critical for organizations and industries to continue to run, is by having that knowledge and being as open to share that as possible.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those best practices, that we're seeing starting to come more and more in tune with the everyday life of a manufacturing, documenting code in its specificity, every line having those notes just to try and showcase what they're trying to, achieve in that code line, because not everyone has the knowledge to, then waste time deconstructing code that they don't particularly understand as well.
Absolutely. And if I may, what I have found historically, it's a lot of those longtime employees who have been burned, who don't want to go document. And they say, hey, I don't want to go document this because they've gone through the process of training someone 20 or 30 or 50 times. And then that person stays for a couple of weeks or 3 months on the long term, and then they move to the facility down the road, or they take a job driving somewhere for an extra couple of dollars an hour. Well, what I have found is that while there's typically a lot of resistance on the documentation or on the sharing or the creating videos or things like that at the beginning, if you can go through and tell the person, hey, it's going to be a little bit of work. I'm going to be here with you. But as we go through this, realize that we have to do this once. And so it doesn't matter if the next person sticks for 2 days or 6 months, the person after it or the people after them are going to have that 80 to 90% knowledge base. And you're not going to have to train a new person, start a new person once every week or once every month, because we already have that. And so sometimes going through the process of why it's valuable for the individual people to go share that knowledge is also important, because at the end of the day, we are asking them to do more work, right? And so we're asking them to do more work, and we need to share the value to those individual people as to why we should have them do more work as we go through this process.
Absolutely. You might have seen my lights turn off because my home automation system is optimally working on energy consumption at the moment. Absolutely.
Yes. It has happened to me more times than I wish to share, Phil.
I guess over your career, has there been any particular working sites or applications that you came into? We call this the industrial anecdote, because it's just kind of this thing where me from my story, going to sites, running through roofs, being in prisons and mental hospitals and all these kind of interesting environments. Have you ever kind of come across one of those that stuck in your mind, and this is the story I tell around the dinner table,
Oh, well, I will be very honest with you, Phil, and I will tell you that no one wants to hear these stories around the dinner table in my home. I think that, as I told you, my dad and I both have a number of industry stories, and when my sister can't sleep at night, she calls and is like, will you go tell me one of those really boring work stories? I need to go to sleep. So outside of it not being a story told at the dinner table, absolutely. I feel like there are just so many sites, and they're all interesting and have different, they have different, I don't know, we could say difficulties, we could say different opportunities. I'll go kind of continue one of the stories that I was sharing. So I do a lot of work in food and beverage, and I've worked with a number of large orange juice and chocolate and beer, and kind of insert all of these different groups there on the food and beverage side. I've had one orange juice client who I've worked with for a bunch of time over the course of 2 or 3 years. And when I showed up, I went, and I like to go talk to operators, right? And so this is a group that would go historically take oranges from literally the raw oranges down in Florida, go through the process of taking out the oil and cutting them in half and squeezing out the juice and the pulp, and store them in these 1,000,000-gallon tanks, which is what, like 340,000 liters or thereabouts for the rest of the world who are not Americans and use normal units of measure. So these huge tanks, and then go through the process of packaging them on demand. And so I really like to go talk to operators. And I went, and we were having this hour or so long session. I had operators from a bunch of these different groups. We had this one operator, Joe, who showed up, and Joe showed up like 20 minutes late to this session. And we were already in the middle of it, talking about some struggles and talking about some opportunities. And if I were younger, I would have been taken aback from the point of him just like raising his hand and interrupting the conversation and saying something to the effect of, we've tried all of these things in the past. What's different? Like, why should I be bothered to go through the process of working through this? Because, we've done all of these, and maybe unironically on the wall were the last 5 or 6 Lean or Lean Six Sigma or TPM or other implementations. They all had their own calendars dating back to like the 90s, right? And it was one of those that, I told them that, this is what we're trying to do. We're not coming in with some larger, objective of trying to force you guys to do it this one particular way. And I told them that I'm happy to go be there with them through this entire process, right? Like this is me. I'm Dave. I'm going to be here with you guys as we go figure out what the problems are and do our very best to go solve the problems. And Joe is one of those people that I talked about at the previous side, right? We're doing this connected workforce, right? So that this mobile app of let's go share videos, let's go share photos, let's go create a knowledge base in order to go help everyone. And Joe was about as negative as any person is when I go meet them the first time. But I'll be very fair to the listeners and tell them that when I go talk to the clients, I tell them that I want the difficult people in the room, right? And I want the difficult people in the room because if I can go change their minds or show them the value, then we can quite literally go through the process of turning, the culture around. We can do some change management. If the person named Joe becomes a person who's on our side, he is going to go drive his entire sector into doing what we want to do because he's been here for 35 or 40, or he stopped counting at 40 years. And he knows he knows not only everything that needs to happen, but he knows all of the answers to the strange questions that happen once every 4 to 10 years. And hopefully someone was here 10 years ago and remembers this. Joe is one of those guys. And Joe is one of those guys on the connected workforce application that we were able to go really turn around. And it went from sitting in the room, I absolutely am not going to go put this thing on my phone, to wait, I only have to go share this documentation once. I don't have to deal with the person, making a mistake and causing 10 or 20 or 100,000 liters of orange juice to have to be dumped because they didn't know what was right and because they didn't go and walk, 10,000 yards to go get the manual. It was one of those light bulb moments. And Joe and 2 or 3 of the other guys who had been on first shift for probably 30 years together, they went from kind of sitting with their arms crossed like this to going through and actually pushing updates. I think it was the plant manager who was most impressed that Joe was going and responding to these updates on the iPad or on the phone or something else like that. And so for me, it's that story, and it's stories like that of being able to go and do some change management and being able to go through the process of changing the perspectives of lots of people and helping the organization become better, not just today on the implementation we're doing, but hopefully for the long run. That is very kind of telling it and very much stick with me.
It's one of those phrases that I keep hearing. It's the change is not just about technology. It's not about implementing new ideas. That people are so critical to the move and bringing people to along the journey with you. That's great, Dave. That's a great story.
The point of resistance, right at the beginning, and then the education portion is so critical for that change of mindset. And then you start seeing the benefits of it, that 10-minute walk, that 20-minute walk back and forward from your desk, or that 3-hour session that you have to do bi-monthly to train a new employee, or, just making that work environment much more easier for that person. They just kind of see the benefits of it so quickly, and it's kind of very rewarding from a personal point of view that you've been able to take them on that journey, right? And not holding their hand, but guiding them through the process is really critical for, system integrators, for management teams, for leadership roles, to really have that emphasis on this drive for innovation, and bringing people along that journey, as Ed said, is so critical. So thank you for sharing that story there.
Absolutely. No, I tell everyone, Phil, Ed, that I have spent a lot of my life in this industry, and we all spend so much time working on these projects that I'm not in it for the kind of next very vanilla project. I'm not in it for I'm not in it for, projects to go sideways and off the rails. And we spend too much time of our life in order to not go through the process of finding fun, interesting projects that actually make a change and actually make a difference to these groups. And so those are actively the projects that I go after and hunt at this point in my career. So I guess from your travels, I guess across the world more recently, you were, over at Hannover Messe, one of the biggest shows in
in Europe. I guess, how does that compare to the American shows and what you guys are doing? Like, is there like vast difference, or is everyone talking the same thing? Like, what's your key takeaways been from those both kind of methodologies?
Absolutely. So I've been lucky enough to be at Hanover Messe for each of the last 2 years in 2023 and 2024. And then in 2023, I was at SPS, which is the Smart Production Systems Nuremberg, which is very much more the process show. Hopefully I'll get to go back this year. And so Hanover Messe is very much a thought leadership show. And I guess I can tell you now, and I will skip to that part. So Hanover Messe is very much the thought leadership show, and SPS is very much the process show. So I didn't necessarily know that going into Hanover Messe the first time. I learned that, and I think it's really interesting. And so that's, I guess, a bit of a tidbit that I will go ahead and share with it. As going in, I had always thought of Hanover Messe as the American football Super Bowl, or like the World Cup for the rest of the world. This is where all of the groups come and they kind of showcase everything. And so for me, Hanover Messe is exceptionally, it is probably the most impressive show that I have ever been to or I've ever seen, because there are just so many halls, right? There are more than a dozen. There are like 15 or 18 halls that are open, and each of these halls are hundreds of thousands of square meters, right? We've got, even the small booths are, 50 or 100 square meters, right? So like nearly 1,000 square feet for your American listeners. And there is nothing that I have been to in the United States that compares to the scale, right? So on scale, I have not seen other buildings that are large enough to house what we see at Hanover Messe. The Siemens booth, I think, is like 2,500 square meters, which is almost like 25,000 square feet, which is the size of like small to medium shows that I have been to. It's just that one particular booth, that one particular area. So size-wise, it's really difficult to compare. And then I would say Hanover Messe is very much the thought leadership show, right? So lots of times I go to shows, Automate and other shows in the US, as I'm sure that you guys see over in Australia. And this is what you can buy, right? Like, I am showing you the thing that I am actively pushing as marketing. At Hanover, you guys can't buy this now, or maybe it's limited release to our very core key customers. And especially in Germany and for the German organizations, they have very much kind of alpha or beta releases of what most of us in the rest of the world or America would call kind of finished products. And they're kind of teasing it. And they're like, hey, this will be released maybe end of this year, right? And so Hanover Messe is very much going and looking at what the industry is going to be, right? So I got to see lots of like generative AI was very big. I saw lots of NVIDIA. I saw lots of Omniverse, and you see lots of collaborations, right? So you might see a group like a Microsoft or a Siemens or an NVIDIA that it has space in like 10 other booths, and they're going and showcasing all of these collaborations. So for me, it's super impressive. And then the crazy part is, guys, you'll see demos that might be the most technical or best looking demo that you'd see in a show anywhere else in the world. And it's literally just for that show, right? Like maybe it'll go to a couple of other smaller shows in Europe, but it's going to that show and it's basically being retired after that. And so that is what I think of like the Hanover and the SPS. The SPS is, again, more of the kind of end of the year. So you see lots of releases. If you guys are Siemens folks, you'll see kind of the new release of the TI portal. That is where they release. So you see lots of releases coming for the Europeans and coming for the Germans at the SPS, especially things that have been teased previously. In America, the shows are smaller, and you typically see a lot of this is what we're talking about now, or this is what we've just released. So you see lots of releases, you see lots of things that are being pushed in one particular area. So I think I'm probably going to get yelled at for saying this, guys, but I think my favorite American show is the big show is probably Automate. That this year was a couple of weeks after Hanover, which was a really fun jet lag both ways on my part, being I think 7 hours out of time between the two of them this year. And so with that, we see lots more automation as a whole. Historically, Automate had been very much like a robotics show. Like 8-10 years ago, it was an every other year, very big robotics show. Everyone brought their robots. We're seeing it more transition into more of a automation. I see lots of software. Yeah, I see lots of software. I see it especially as German and European organizations are viewing it as kind of the major U.S. show. And so that's a lot of fun. It is very much kind of scaled down. But one of my favorite parts about that is I get to see and talk to a lot of people who I only generally see once or twice a year. So for me, that's very much you get to go see the friends who you maybe talk to more often in the U.S., who are in the U.S., as opposed to the friends that you talk to who we've all transited over to Germany, 6 or 8 hours of time zone difference in order to go see each other at the German show. So I think both of them are fun. It really depends upon what you like. I would say kind of my favorite shows are the smaller shows, the shows in which you either know the people or you know the people who are going to be there are going to have similar of interest or topical things that you want to discuss. But I think it really depends as to the goal of what you're looking for.
No, every time I talk to people who've gone to those shows, Dave, they talk about the scale and the size. I don't think we get an appreciation of what that looks like in Australia. Feels in Brisbane, which is a slightly smaller city than Melbourne, but Brisbane does have a really nice exhibition centre. We in Melbourne we have a big exhibition shed yet, but when you talk about those sort of numbers, it goes beyond our knowledge, and even when we go to the shows locally, there's so much information to obtain, and especially being IIoT people, automation people, there's smidgens of it. There's obviously things that you see online. There's the shows, there's the events, there's the manufacturers or the OEMs, like you said, pushing what they're selling, and then the ones who are creating applications that, hey, this is not yet for sale, but it's coming. All that noise, all that information, you as that person are digesting it and then taking that to your customers, right? And then sort of helping them on their way. You're probably seeing trends that are developing. Phil and I, we hear it and we see it as well. And I'm sure you're seeing it at a much higher level because of the access of people you're talking to and the access, I suppose, of places you go. It makes it hard to a degree for companies, I suppose, to know what they need to do, where they need to be at. And through the story you shared with Joe, how he had to try to bring him to digitizing his knowledge. I suppose through all that information and knowledge and the journey, not just for you, but even our customers, people who are listening to this, we're hoping a lot of manufacturers listen to know, okay, what tidbit of advice, what should they be doing now to focus in the efforts to stay ahead, Yeah.
So I think that's a really good, exceptionally difficult question, Ed. So I see, Phil, between you and Ed, Ed is the one who's going to ask the really tough questions. So I think that's a good. So I would say that, yes, I feel like I'm really blessed to be able to go have a bunch of really fun, interesting conversations with manufacturers and with OEMs across the world. That is absolutely one of the benefits that I get to be afforded from Manufacturing Hub and from being able to go to a bunch of these great shows. I would say, I guess I would say a couple of things. One, if you are a manufacturer, if you are an end user, as I would call, I would maybe kind of first put the earmuffs on and not worry about all of the trends, all of the buzzwords, and to kind of Phil's earliest comment of look at making sure that your core automation, your core data collection, your industry 3.0 is sound, right? Like before we go look at almost anything beyond that, make sure that you can collect the data that you need, and it's going somewhere, and hopefully you own that's somewhere, right? So it's going somewhere that you own and can be able to go query that information, be it reporting or trending or something along those lines. I think that is core, super important before we look at all of these other fun, interesting, different tools. If you're to that point, I think there are a lot of very interesting tools that are going to help you skip some of those intermediary steps, right? I think generative AI, I guess I am bullish on generative AI. If you guys listen to Manufacturing Hub, you'll know that I am the bullish one. Vlad is the non-bullish one. I think there's absolutely some value that you see, but from my perspective, it's very much the operations. It's very much kind of the day-to-day work that I see immediate value in generative AI. Industrial Copilot is the big one that you see. It's a Siemens Microsoft collaboration. I have been really lucky to go watch it kind of grow at a nearly exponential rate just in the last 6 or 8 months. But over the last probably year and a half or so, I've been able to go watch it grow. And I think it's really interesting, but you need to have an idea of what you want to do with it, right? Just dumping a bunch of really bad data into something is not going to work. Again, it's very much kind of foundational steps. And then I would say maybe if you're somewhere in between, I would say that there's lots of tools. I would call a lot of them IIoT tools in order to be able to go put sensors in a place that we don't have to wire power. We don't have to wire data. It can go into a wireless gateway and be able to go connect a bunch of those hard to reach places that are tens of kilometers out into the middle of the bush, places that are kind of in an area that historically you couldn't go collect. So I would say there are lots of tools like that. And if you guys are looking at those tools, again, it's one of those that I would want to be able to own that information and own that data and have it in my central repository. Unless there's a very particular reason of I want to go lease some of these tools. We see lots of as a service tools. I think they're really interesting. They are sometimes a really great choice. A lot of times, I think at the end of the day, groups want to own this information. Or if you don't necessarily think you want to own the information or it's critical today, it almost certainly will be 5 to 10 years as you go and expand these tools.
Yeah, that's great. That process of, I suppose, like Phil here did a really good graphic the other day around, make sure that your Industry 4 is done by making sure you go down the Industry 3 road, make sure you get through that road, get those things done well. And I think you're right. There's a lot of noise out there, and we're proponents of helping customers to bring it back, dial it down a bit. Yeah, these are great ideas you have, but let's just make sure that you've got an infrastructure in place. Or the word you used earlier today, the piping. How you mentioned IoT is that piping of a business, and I think that's so important. You've learned a lot, Dave, and I think you're one of those people who continually learn. Like you mentioned, you're optimist, looking forward, what things are happening, and you've learned so much up to date. Phil and I, we're on a big learning journey too. And what's on your radar to learn in the next 6 to 12 months? What's there you want to really delve into deeply?
And I think you've had plenty of suggestions for books and through the podcast as well. So which one has standed out for you?
Interesting. So I absolutely, it has 100% been a learning journey. And I feel like most guests, certainly every month, there are 2 or 3 or 5 things that I want to go dive into or Vlad dives into. And so there's certainly some sharing in between those. I guess on my side, wow. So I would say learning probably next, within the next 12 months, I am still very excited to see where this generative AI goes. And I think that there will be learning because I know that I am in process of talking and working with clients as to how we can use some of these tools, right? And I think it's still very, very early on as to what these tools look like and to what the differences will be. But for me, it feels like we could be at the precipice. I guess for me, within the next 12 to 24 months, we'll know if everyone's going to be using this within the next 5 years, or if this was just a really fun, interesting fad. Again, I think there are really good points that we will use it. And I think there's lots of points that I've seen and have used with documentation, and as opposed to the control find, or as opposed to a bunch of manual text inputs, we're able to go ask this, internal generative AI how we can go do it, and it will go regurgitate it and save me hundreds of hours on lots of these implementations. So for me, that is a win just in and of itself. And so I would say kind of that is kind of top as to kind of piece of technology that I'm looking at and want to learn. There are always new, fun, interesting pieces of technology coming through. And I always want to stay maybe not at the very bleeding edge of those, but I want to go stay at the kind of bleeding edge of we're almost stable, right? So when I go work with clients, I feel like my value is not this is, best use case of this industry today. It's this is what I see across these 5 to 10 industries. This is where I think we can go take other industrial learnings and apply them to this particular use case. And this is where I project they're going to be in the next 5 years. So without dropping a whole bunch of names, I see industrial DevOps and industrial data ops. I don't know if you guys have run across those terms, but there are a number of different companies talking about basically how we use the data and how we are coding the data, if you will. If you guys will forgive me for dumbing it down to how we're using the data and how we're coding the data, I think that is really important. And I think that we're going to see lots of huge opportunities as we move forward, kind of in and amongst those. And then if I may, kind of to Phil's point about the books, there are so many books. I think the books are really interesting. I would say that I guess I spent a long period of time going down what is called kind of like operational excellence. I think the goal, I don't know if you guys do recommendations or have historically done recommendations up until this point, but we've had a number of groups, a number of people recommend The Goal, which is an Ellie Goldratt book, one of his first kind of big books. He coined the term operational excellence. And so I've spent a bunch of time going down that path. And I guess the long story short is I find it really interesting because there are people historically, Ellie and his group, and the Goldratt Institute and all of these operational excellence folks who are trying to use lean, trying to use other tools like this to help solve throughput, help solve downtime, help solve other issues. And I find it really interesting because there's almost no technology in these groups, right? Like quite literally, we see Kanban on whiteboards. We see scheduling. Like I've literally worked with some of these groups and I've done scheduling by creating packets of all the information all these groups need to know and literally putting it in a folder, right? Like a physical paper folder on a wall with magnets so we could go move around. These are the runs that we want to do in X, Y, and Z days. And so for me, spend a bunch of time and still spend a bunch of time blending the thoughts that are good or are in theory good of how we can go solve these human problems with technology so that we don't leave everything in paper format and we can use technology, right? I've worked with groups who like to call, the cell phones supercomputers, right? Like everyone has a supercomputer in their pocket. Everyone knows how to go use their phone in order to go on Facebook, to go do these other things. It doesn't matter if I don't know, kids these days spend way too much time early. So it doesn't matter if you're a 2-year-old who are probably better on their iPad or Kindle than I am, or if you're a 65-year-old, almost everyone uses a smartphone. Almost everyone uses social media. I think there's a huge opportunity and continue to find opportunities blending those technologies with easy to understand user interfaces so that different people can go through the process of quickly and easily being able to understand the industrial tools. Because it's 2024 outside the facility, it should be at least 2020 inside the facility, if not 2024.
Correct.
Yeah.
Dave,
That's the dream.
It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, and thank you for your insights and your experience. And we really appreciate you sharing them with us.
Yeah, look, it's to iterate Phil's word, thank you so much again, Dave. And it's been an honor listening to you talk. And I know we can go for hours here, and that'll be not a problem. Around breakfast, we'll probably do breakfast, lunch, and dinner on the same day, talking about all these things. We look forward to seeing you and one day in the future at any one of those international exhibitions. Or if you're down this way, we've got some great exhibitions in Australia. Look, we wish you all the continued success as you move into getting closer to that 200th episode. You probably predicted already might be this year, maybe, or next year, whenever that might be, and all ahead. So thank you very much.
And don't forget to subscribe to the Unplugged IIoT podcast if you're listening out there, and definitely check out the Manufacturing Hub. Thanks, Dave, for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.